The moment my husband said those words, he threw me out of our home while I was 8 weeks pregnant. That night, I slept alone in my car in a freezing grocery store parking lot, thinking my life was over. But 48 hours later, my phone rang. A lawyer from Portland said, "Ma'am, your first husband passed away and left you $77 million. I could barely breathe until he added one final sentence: "There's just one condition." And that's when I realized my husband hadn't abandoned me because he thought I cheated. He abandoned me because he knew about the money before I did. The night my husband threw me out, it was raining so hard I could barely see through the windshield. I was sitting in my car outside a gas station at almost midnight, one hand resting on my stomach, still trying to process the words he had screamed only an hour earlier. That baby isn't mine. 6 years of marriage destroyed in a single sentence. I kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering if I had missed some warning sign, some crack in the life I thought we had built together. My suitcase was in the back seat. My phone battery was dying. I had nowhere to go, and the worst part wasn't the cold or the fear. It was realizing how fast a person who once promised to protect you could suddenly look at you like you were nothing. But what I didn't know that night was that my husband hadn't kicked me out because he believed I cheated. He kicked me out because of something he had discovered weeks earlier, something worth millions of dollars. And before the sun came up the next morning, a stranger from another state would call me with news that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my past, and the man I had trusted with my entire life. My name is Vanessa Cole, and until that winter, I believed I understood exactly who my husband was. Ethan and I lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago, the kind where people decorated for every holiday and waved politely while walking their dogs. From the outside, our marriage looked stable. We had been together 6 years, owned a beautiful two-story house, shared weekend routines, inside jokes, and dinner parties with mutual friends. I worked as an interior designer for a luxury firm downtown, while Ethan managed investment properties with his business partner. We weren't wildly rich, but we were comfortable enough to make people think we had everything figured out. And maybe that was the problem. People only see polished surfaces. They never notice the cracks underneath until the whole thing collapses. Looking back now, the first signs appeared almost a year before he threw me out. Ethan became secretive in ways that felt small at first. He started stepping outside to answer phone calls. He changed passwords without mentioning it. Some nights I would wake up at 2 a.m. and find his side of the bed empty, only to discover him downstairs staring at his laptop with that tense, distant look on his face. Whenever I asked what was wrong, he always had an answer ready: work stress, property issues, clients being difficult. I wanted to believe him because believing him was easier than questioning the entire foundation of our marriage. Then came the strange questions about my past, specifically about my ex-husband, Adrian Mercer. Adrian and I had married young and divorced quietly after 4 years together. There had been no cheating, no screaming matches, no dramatic betrayal. We had simply become different people with different futures. After the divorce, Adrian moved to Seattle and built a software company while I stayed in Chicago and rebuilt my life. Eventually, we stopped talking entirely. More than 11 years passed without a single phone call between us. That's why Ethan's sudden curiosity felt so strange. One night during dinner, he casually asked, "Whatever happened to that tech guy you were married to?" I shrugged and told him I didn't know. A few weeks later, he asked again, this time pretending it was part of a conversation about successful startups. Then another time, during a drive home from a party, he brought Adrian up out of nowhere and asked whether he had remarried. At the time, I thought maybe Ethan was insecure. Maybe turning 38 had triggered something in him. I never imagined those questions were connected to something much darker already unfolding behind my back. Then came the pregnancy. I found out on a cold Tuesday morning after feeling exhausted for days. I stared at the tests in complete shock, then laughed and cried at the same time alone in the bathroom. We hadn't been actively trying for a baby, but we had talked about it many times. Ethan always said he wanted a daughter someday. I spent the entire afternoon imagining how I would tell him. I even stopped at a baby boutique after work and bought a tiny pair of white socks in a little gift box. I thought it would become one of those happy memories couples tell for years. Instead, it became the night my life exploded. I came home just after 7 carrying the tiny gift box in one hand and takeout containers in the other. Ethan was in the kitchen pouring himself a drink, still wearing his gray work coat. I remember thinking how normal everything looked. The soft jazz playing from the speaker near the window, The smell of garlic from the restaurant downstairs, the lights glowing over the marble counter. Ordinary moments are dangerous that way. You never realize you're standing inside the last few seconds of your old life until they're already gone. I smiled and handed him the box first. "Open this before dinner," I said. He looked mildly confused but did it anyway. The second he pulled out the baby socks, his entire expression changed. Not surprise, not happiness, something colder. He set the socks down slowly and stared at me in complete silence. I laughed nervously and held up the ultrasound photo from my purse. "I'm pregnant," I whispered. "We're having a baby." For a moment, he didn't move at all. Then he asked one question in a voice so flat it barely sounded human. "Are you serious?" I nodded, already feeling my stomach tighten with confusion. And then he said the sentence that shattered everything. "That child isn't mine." I actually thought he was joking at first. I waited for him to smirk or laugh or say something sarcastic, but he didn't. His face only grew harder. He started accusing me immediately, saying he had known for months that I was hiding something, that I'd been distant, secretive, dishonest. I kept trying to interrupt, trying to understand where this was even coming from, but he wouldn't let me speak. The more I denied it, the angrier he became. Finally, he slammed his glass onto the counter so hard it cracked against the marble and pointed toward the front door. "Get out," he said. "I'm not raising another man's kid." My whole body went numb. I remember staring at him thinking this couldn't possibly be real. 6 years together and he hadn't even asked a question before deciding I was guilty. I tried reaching for his arm, but he stepped away from me like my touch disgusted him. That hurt more than the shouting. Within an hour, my suitcase was packed. Ethan stood near the staircase watching while I stuffed clothes into a bag with shaking hands. He didn't help, didn't apologize, didn't hesitate. And the strangest part was how prepared he seemed, almost like he had already rehearsed this moment long before it happened. By 9:30, I was driving through freezing rain with nowhere to go. I parked outside a 24-hour gas station because it was bright and crowded enough to feel safe. I sat there gripping the steering wheel while tears finally started pouring down my face. My husband had thrown me out while pregnant without proof, without a conversation, without even a moment of doubt. But somewhere underneath the heartbreak, another feeling quietly began forming. A question. Why had he been so certain? Not suspicious, not hurt, certain, and deep down, I already knew people only react that fast when they believe they have something to gain. Around midnight, the temperature dropped so low that I had to keep turning the engine on every few minutes just to stay warm. I wrapped my coat around myself and stared through the windshield while people came and went from the gas station carrying coffee cups and snack bags, completely unaware that a pregnant woman had just lost her entire life 30 feet away from them. I checked my bank account 3 times that night, hoping somehow the numbers would change. They didn't. I had less than $600 in my personal account because most of our savings had been sitting in the joint account Ethan controlled. He always handled the finances. At the time, it felt practical. Now it felt terrifying. My laptop, important client files, passport, everything I actually needed was still inside the house. Worse than that, my health insurance was under Ethan's plan. Sitting there in that freezing parking lot, I realized how vulnerable I truly was. One angry decision from my husband, and suddenly I had no home, no access to money, and no stability while carrying his child. I should have felt broken, but instead I felt something else beginning to rise underneath the fear. Clarity. Ethan's reaction had been too immediate, too calculated. Men who genuinely believe they've been betrayed usually demand explanations. They ask questions. They explode emotionally. Ethan hadn't done that. He had acted like someone executing a decision already made long ago. And then I remembered the questions about Adrian, my ex-husband. The timing suddenly felt wrong in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Sitting in my freezing car at 1 a.m, I pulled out my phone and searched Adrian Mercier's name for the first time in years. What I found made my stomach tighten instantly. 3 years earlier, Adrian's software company had been acquired by a massive tech corporation in a deal rumored to be worth hundreds of millions. There were articles about him stepping away from public life afterward, investment interviews, business profiles. Then suddenly, nothing. Almost complete silence online after the acquisition. I kept scrolling while my pulse pounded harder with every article I found. Ethan worked in investments and property acquisitions. Researching financial records was practically his second language. If I could discover this much in 20 minutes sitting in a parking lot, what had he discovered months earlier? And, more importantly, why had he been asking about Adrian repeatedly right before throwing me out? The answer slid into place slowly and horribly. This was never about cheating. Ethan had learned something connected to Adrian's money, and somehow my pregnancy had ruined whatever plan he had been building in his head. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes for a second, trying to think clearly. If I was right, then my husband hadn't just abandoned me. He had strategically removed me from the marriage before something happened involving Adrian's estate or finances. And if that was true, then Ethan was far more dangerous than I had ever understood. By 5 in the morning, I had stopped crying completely. Fear was still there, but something steadier had taken its place. I started making a list in my phone: get legal advice, secure personal documents, protect finances, find out what Ethan knew. For the first time since leaving the house, I felt like I could breathe again. Because once you understand someone's real motive, they lose the power that confusion gives them. And as exhausted as I was, one thing had become crystal clear by sunrise. My husband hadn't destroyed our marriage because I was weak. He destroyed it because he thought I didn't know my own value yet. By the time the sun rose, the rain had stopped, but the cold stayed in the air like it had nowhere else to go. I drove from the gas station to a 24-hour diner because I needed heat, coffee, and somewhere that didn't feel like the inside of a nightmare. My hands were still shaking when I pushed open the door. The bell above it rang like nothing important had happened in my life at all. Inside, the diner was half empty. A tired waitress refilled coffee cups without looking up, and an old couple sat in silence near the window. I chose a booth in the corner where I could see the street but not be seen too easily. I ordered coffee, I didn't drink, and sat there staring at my phone like it might give me answers if I looked long enough. Instead, I started planning. Not emotionally, not like a victim, like someone trying to survive something structured and deliberate. First, I needed my documents: passport, ID, birth records, my laptop, and my work files. Without those, I was trapped outside my own life. Second, I needed legal advice immediately, not just for divorce, but for financial protection. I didn't know what rights I had anymore, but I refused to stay ignorant. Third, I needed to understand Adrian's situation properly. If Ethan had built his entire behavior around something connected to my ex-husband, then I needed facts, not assumptions. And fourth, I needed to confirm whether Ethan's accusation about the baby had ever been about belief at all, or if it had just been a weapon. That thought stayed with me longer than anything else. I wasn't stupid. I had spent years reading people in my design work, understanding how structure and pressure interact. Ethan didn't react like a man who discovered betrayal. He reacted like someone executing a plan that had been delayed by an unexpected variable. And that variable was me being pregnant. I pulled out my phone again and searched deeper into Adrian Mercer's acquisition history. This time I didn't stop at headlines. I went into investor pages, archived press releases, financial summaries. The deeper I went, the more one thing became clear. Whatever Adrian had sold, it was massive. Not just successful life-changing money territory, and the timing of everything didn't feel random anymore. My stomach tightened when I noticed something else. Ethan's behavior shift had started roughly 8 months before he threw me out. Around the same time, Adrian's name started appearing in financial circles again, quietly, indirectly, as if people were trying not to draw attention to it. I stared at the screen for a long time without blinking. Then I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. How much did Ethan already know before I ever told him I was pregnant? Because if he had been investigating Adrian long before that moment, then my husband hadn't lost control that night in the kitchen. He had finally reached the point where he believed he no longer needed to pretend. I closed my phone slowly and looked out the diner window. The morning traffic was starting, people heading to jobs, schools, normal lives that didn't include sleeping in cars or rebuilding reality from scratch. But for the first time since everything collapsed, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what Ethan had been trying to protect himself from. And whatever it was big enough for him to destroy a marriage without hesitation. That meant the truth wasn't just personal anymore. It was financial, strategic, and dangerous. I left the diner just after sunrise with my coffee still untouched, and the plan that finally felt real instead of emotional. My first stop was a storage facility where I kept a few things for my freelance projects: tools, hard drives, backup files. I paid in cash, kept my head down, and told myself I was not homeless. I was temporarily displaced. There's a difference, and I needed to believe it. From there, I drove straight toward the neighborhood where Ethan and I had lived. Every mile felt heavier, like my body remembered things my mind was trying to deny. The house looked exactly the same when I arrived. Same clean driveway, same trimmed hedges, same life that had continued without me. I parked a block away so I wouldn't be seen immediately and sat there for a full minute, just breathing. Then I walked. I told myself I was only there for documents, nothing emotional, nothing extra. But the moment I reached the front door, I realized something was wrong. The lock had been changed. My key didn't fit. I stood there frozen, staring at the handle like it had betrayed me personally. Ethan hadn't just thrown me out, he had sealed me out completely. I knocked once, no answer. Again, still nothing. Then I heard movement inside. Slow, deliberate, and finally the door opened just a few inches. Ethan stood there calm, fully dressed, like he had been expecting me, not surprised. Not guilty. Prepared. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I asked him where my things were. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he looked at my stomach for a brief second and then back at my face. That small glance told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't confused about the baby anymore. He had already decided what it meant. "Take what you need and leave," he said flatly. "This doesn't have to get worse." My voice shook when I asked him why he was doing this, why he destroyed everything without even talking to me. For the first time, something shifted in his expression, just barely. Not regret, not emotion. Calculation. "You don't understand what you're involved in," he said. And that sentence hit harder than the divorce ever could have, because it confirmed what I'd been afraid to accept. This was never about me as a person. It was about something I was connected to without even knowing it. I forced myself to stay steady. I told him I just needed my documents. He stepped aside and let me in. The house felt different, empty in a controlled way, like things had been removed carefully, not rushed. My laptop was gone. My work files were gone. Even small personal things I used every day had disappeared. I asked him where everything was. He said nothing, just watched me. That silence told me he wasn't just ending a marriage. He was managing evidence. When I finally came back out with a small box of remaining personal items, I noticed a black car parked further down the street that hadn't been there before. Tinted windows. Engine running. No movement. Ethan followed my gaze for a second, then stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Forget everything you think you know about your ex-husband," he said, "and don't look into it again." I froze. Because that wasn't a warning from a husband. It was a warning from someone afraid of consequences. I left without another word. But as I drove away, one thought stayed with me, sharp and unavoidable. Ethan wasn't protecting himself from my anger. He was protecting himself from whatever would happen if I ever learned the full truth about Adrian Mercer. And now I knew this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. I didn't go back to Jess's apartment immediately. Instead, I parked near a public library and sat in the car for a long time. Watching people walk in and out like normal life was still something I could rejoin if I just acted calm enough. My hands were steady now, but my thoughts weren't. Ethan's words kept repeating in my head. "Forget everything you think you know about your ex-husband." That wasn't something you say to control a situation. That was something you say when you're afraid of what the truth will do. I finally went inside the library because I needed internet that couldn't be traced easily and silence that didn't feel like pressure. I opened my laptop and started searching Adrian Mercer again. But this time, I didn't look for his company. I looked for people connected to him after the acquisition, investors, legal firms, advisors. And that's when I found it. A name buried deep in a business filing from 2 years earlier, an estate restructuring document tied indirectly to Adrian's post-acquisition assets. My breath slowed when I saw it. A trust had been set up under strict legal protection, not just for Adrian, but with a secondary beneficiary clause that referenced a former spouse pending verification of identity and marital dissolution records. My name wasn't written in full anywhere publicly, but the structure made it clear enough that someone close to the financial side of Adrian's life would know exactly who it referred to. I closed the laptop slowly. This wasn't random. This wasn't even speculation anymore. Ethan hadn't just been curious about Adrian, he had been following a paper trail, A very expensive one. I leaned back in the chair and tried to connect to the timeline properly. Ethan's behavior shift. The secret calls. The sudden financial monitoring. The questions about Adrian. The immediate accusation the night I told him I was pregnant. It wasn't emotional instability. It was timing. And then it hit me in a way that made my stomach drop. My pregnancy hadn't caused his reaction, it had interrupted something. Something he thought he had time to finish before I became legally and financially tied to him through a child. I sat there for a long moment just staring at the screen without seeing it anymore, because now I understood something I didn't want to understand. Ethan didn't think I was lying about the baby. He needed me out of the way before I could become part of a legal chain that involved Adrian's estate. And the only way to guarantee that was to destroy my credibility first. I closed my laptop and pressed my fingers against my forehead, forcing myself to stay grounded. Fear was there, but so was something sharper now. Awareness. This wasn't just a divorce. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a calculated removal from a financial equation I hadn't even known I was part of. And somewhere between Adrian's past and Ethan's panic, there was a truth big enough to ruin both of them. I didn't realize how long I'd been sitting in the library until the lights outside shifted and the afternoon started turning into evening. My phone had 4 missed calls. Jess, an unknown number, and one from Ethan's lawyer. That last one made my stomach tighten, not because I was scared of the legal part, but because it meant things were moving faster than I was ready for. I didn't call back. Instead, I walked out of the library and kept my head down until I reached my car. Only then did I let myself think clearly again. Ethan wasn't reacting randomly. Everything he had done, the questions, the financial behavior, the cold certainty on the night he threw me outfit together like pieces of something already built long before I ever saw it. When I finally got to Jess's place, she opened the door before I even knocked properly. One look at my face and she stepped aside without asking questions. That's what real support looks like. No pressure, no forcing explanations, just space when you need it most. I told her everything in pieces. Adrian, the trust, Ethan's warning, the car outside the house. By the time I finished, she was sitting very still, processing it all like someone trying to solve a problem that had too many hidden variables. So, you're saying, she said slowly, your ex-husband might have left behind something huge, and your current husband figured it out before you did? I nodded. Saying it out loud made it feel even more unreal. Jess leaned back and exhaled. Then Ethan didn't throw you out because of emotion, she said. He did it because you became a liability in whatever he was trying to control. That word liability stuck in the room like a weight. I had never thought of myself like that in my own life. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't powerful. I was just me. But to Ethan, I wasn't a person in that moment. I was a variable that had shifted the outcome of something bigger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed on the couch while Jess went to bed, scrolling through old financial news about Adrian's company acquisition again and again, trying to find anything I missed. Around 3 a.m., I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a mention of a secondary legal advisor involved in structuring parts of the trust. A private consultancy firm based out of Atlanta. My city. My life. My marriage. Everything suddenly felt closer together than it should have. I wrote the name down in my notes and stared at it until it stopped feeling like just words. Because now there was a new possibility forming in my mind. If Ethan knew about Adrian's financial structure, he didn't discover it alone. Someone had guided him. Someone who understood both legal structure and timing. And if that was true, then the real danger wasn't just what Ethan did to me. It was who helped him decide how to do it. Morning came without sleep, just a heavy kind of exhaustion that sat behind my eyes. Jess was already in the kitchen when I walked in, making coffee like she understood that questions could wait until I was ready to face them. I wasn't. But I also knew I couldn't stay still anymore. Stillness was starting to feel dangerous. I needed facts, not theories. So I opened my laptop again, this time not searching Adrian or Ethan, but the Atlanta consultancy firm I had found at 3 a.m. The name came up quickly. A private advisory group that specialized in estate structuring, asset protection, and high-value marital financial planning. The kind of firm people don't talk about openly because they don't want to admit they've ever needed them. As I dug deeper, I found something that made my chest tighten. One of the senior advisors had previously worked with real estate investors, including firms connected to Ethan's business partner. That was the thread. Small, thin, but real. Jess sat down across from me and watched my face change as I read. "You found something," she said quietly. I nodded, unable to look away from the screen. "This isn't just Ethan," I said. "He didn't figure this out alone." Jess leaned forward slightly. "Then who did?" I didn't answer immediately because I didn't want to say it out loud until I was sure. But deep down, I already knew what direction this was pointing. Someone had connected Adrian's financial history, the trust structure, and my marriage. Someone had turned it into a strategy. And Ethan had followed it like a plan that was handed to him, not something he created himself. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time I answered. A man's voice, calm and professional, introduced himself as part of Ethan's legal team. He said they were hoping to resolve matters quietly and avoid unnecessary escalation. I listened without interrupting. Then he added something that made my grip tighten around the phone. "Mr. Carter's willing to be reasonable regarding financial separation, but he would strongly prefer you avoid investigating matters outside the marital estate." That sentence confirmed everything I feared. They weren't just managing a divorce. They were managing information. I asked one simple question. "What exactly are you afraid I'll find?" There was a pause, not confusion. Calculation. Then the call ended. Jess looked at me as I set the phone down. "That wasn't normal legal language," she said. "No," I replied quietly. "That was a warning." For the first time, I understood the real shape of what I was dealing with. This wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't even just about money anymore. It was about control over a financial truth that someone had spent a long time building and even longer protecting. And I was the only person who didn't know the full story yet. That night, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed at Jess's place, but I barely spoke. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw pieces of the same puzzle: Ethan's face when he said I should leave, the lawyer's careful tone on the phone, the consultancy firm buried in financial records. Nothing felt separate anymore. Everything was connected in a way that made my life feel like it had been quietly monitored long before I ever noticed. Around midnight, I got up and sat at the kitchen table with Jess's laptop again. I stopped searching names and started searching patterns. Estate disputes after acquisitions. Hidden beneficiary clauses. Marital timing conflicts in high-value trusts. The more I read, the more I realized something uncomfortable. Cases like this didn't happen suddenly. They were prepared in advance, structured, mapped, anticipated, which meant someone, somewhere, had built a framework around Adrian's financial legacy long before Ethan ever threw me out of that house. My phone lit up again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, "Stop digging. You're not seeing the full structure yet." No name, no explanation, just that. My blood ran cold, but I didn't delete it. I showed it to Jess instead. She read it twice, then slowly handed the phone back. "Okay," she said carefully. "Now it's official. Someone is watching what you're doing." I should have panicked. I didn't. Instead, something inside me clicked into focus. Fear was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. "If someone is watching," I said quietly, "then I'm close." Jess didn't argue. She just stood up and locked the door without saying a word. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to react anymore. I was going to trace everything back to its origin. Adrian's estate, the consultancy, the legal advisors, Ethan's business connections. Every path had to lead somewhere. And I was going to find the point where all of them intersected. Because whatever Ethan thought he was protecting, it wasn't just money. It was something structured carefully enough that even my existence inside the marriage had been treated as a risk from the beginning. And now that I had seen the outline, there was no going back to not knowing. By the time everything reached its final point, it no longer felt like I was surviving a marriage or even a divorce. It felt like standing in the middle of something much larger that had been built long before I ever stepped into it. The papers, the lawyers, the money, the warnings, all of it had been pieces of a system I never agreed to be part of, yet somehow I was the central variable in it. Ethan wasn't the origin of that system. He was just the person who panicked when I unknowingly disrupted it, and that realization changed everything about how I saw him and how I saw myself. Because for a long time, I had believed I was simply reacting to betrayal. But the truth was harder. I had been placed inside a situation where other people had already decided what my value was before I ever understood my own. When Adrian's estate finally became fully clear, it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about timing, control, and assumptions made by people who believed I would never question the structure around me. They were wrong. Every single one of them. Ethan tried to remove me from the equation. Others tried to silence me. And for a moment, it almost worked. But what they underestimated was not my intelligence or my strength. It was my refusal to stay unaware once something didn't make sense. That was the real turning point, not the inheritance, not the divorce, not the confrontation. The moment I stopped accepting confusion as normal. In the end, I didn't win because of money or legal strategy. I won because I started asking better questions than the people who were trying to control the outcome. And once you see how carefully some people build systems around your silence, you never go back to living inside that silence again. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is simple but uncomfortable. People will define your worth for as long as you allow them to control your understanding of the truth. The moment you start verifying things for yourself, documents, actions, motives, you stop being a passive part of someone else's plan. You become the point where their plan can fail. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where nothing makes sense, don't rush to explain it away. Don't shrink yourself to fit someone else's version of reality. Step back. Observe. Question everything. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in your life isn't what you can see, it's what others assume you will never look into.